Welcome to Bench to Bedside, a weekly series of live conversations about recent advances in cancer, from the research bench to treatment at the patient's bedside. And now, your host and the director of the University of Kansas Cancer Center, Dr. Roy Jensen.
Hi, I'm Dr. Roy Jensen. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Bench to Bedside. With me is Dr. Shahid Umar, professor and vice chair of research in the Department of Surgery at the University of Kansas Medical Center, and a gastrointestinal researcher at the University of Kansas Cancer Center. Today we're talking about microbes, specifically the bacteria in our gut and their connection to cancer and our health. Dr. Umar, thanks for joining us today. Let's start with an overview of the human microbiome. What exactly is that?
So microbiome seems to be the buzzword these days. And I will start by saying that we are never alone. Now, what does it mean? It means that our bodies are inhabited by trillions of tiny friends that we collectively call microbiota. These are bacteria, viruses, fungi, and archaea, to name a few of these microbes, actually. The name microbiome is given to the genes, all the genes that are present within the cells of these microorganisms, actually. These bacteria are transferred from parents to offspring, just as we inherit genes from our parents and from their parents, basically. And these vertical transfers that we call are the bacteria that we inherit when a baby is born from the mother. Now 90% of these bacteria live in our gut, so it's almost called a forgotten organ, basically. There are other places such as skin, lung, reproductive organs, for example, that have a distinct microbiome of their own, and they are very different. Then there are places such as liver and pancreas that do not have a microbiome of their own. However, they are influenced by the metabolites which are generated as a result of gut activity, and therefore these metabolites could be absorbed systemically and therefore go to these organs to help in terms of affecting the the outcome of various activities.
Okay. So the microbiome has kind of exploded on the research front, and why is it so important for our overall health?
Right. So they do a lot of things that our bodies can't. First of all, humans provide a niche for these microbes. We also provide a nutrient, lumen of the gut, which is basically the mucus which is present in the lumen, and this mucus acts as not only a reservoir as well as a shelter for these microbes, but it also provides nutrients to these microbes, actually. So the microbes then return the favor by digesting the food that we eat. They absorb nutrients, they produce vitamins that our bodies can't produce, actually. And more importantly, and then they calibrate the immune system, but more importantly, they protect us from environmental pathogens. Now, the numbers of the microbes that we carry in our gut, I said 95% are in the gut, actually. That number is usually, is very unstable from the time a child is born to around 3 years of age, but after that it just stabilizes. However, the composition evolves continuously and is influenced by diet, the type of maternal colonization, for example, use of pre- and postnatal antibiotics, for example. So in a nutshell, they do a lot of heavy lifting for us, and we don't even realize that they are really doing us a favor. So basically, the saying that what we eat is what we are. And it's true, but what is also true is what we eat is what they eat, actually. So we have to be very, very, cognizant of the fact that if these microbes are not healthy, then they will affect our health sooner or later.
Okay. So expanding on that a little bit, what is the microbiome's connection to colon cancer?
Sure, that's a great question. So colon cancer, as we all know, is a very complex and heterogeneous disease where several factors, including host genetics, mutation of, basically in those genes, diet, immune system, as well as, of course, microbiome, they all play, very important roles in the whole process, actually. Now, these factors are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Now, what does it mean? It means that they, if you have a genetic susceptibility, for example, if there is a propensity or predisposition within a family, of someone who has a history of cancers then it's possible that they may have an underlying defect in terms of the type of bacteria they will be carrying in their gut, actually. And so if you look at the numbers, for example, the upper GI, basically, since 90% of these live in the gut, upper GI is predominantly sterile. It's not until you reach the terminal ileum, which is the last part of this small intestine, and then the colon, which is the large intestine. That's when you get to a point where it's almost 1 trillion bacteria, actually. So with that kind of bacterial load, it's not unusual to expect that microbiota may be providing the missing link, basically. Now, with that being said, the single most important factor that helps or that dictates the type of bacteria and the bacterial metabolites that will be generated is diet. So I will give you 2 examples. Number one, we have high fat diet. So these are the diets that are rich in red and processed meat, for example. What they will do is they change the microenvironment in a way that causes this bacterial profile to change, and then therefore the metabolites that are generated can cause inflammation, can generate a lot of reactive oxygen species, actually, and therefore can damage the DNA, which will sort of then culminate in a state where you have massive inflammation, DNA damage, and therefore onset of the process of carcinogenesis, actually. On the other extreme is a diet which is rich in fiber. And so a fiber diet, what it does actually is, depending on the type of fiber that we consume, whether soluble or insoluble, mostly soluble fiber generates metabolites that actually boost our immune system. And therefore, they increase the immune surveillance in those situations, actually, which will then help a person fight cancer, actually. So there are 2 extremes, really, one where you have an out-of-whack immune system due to high-fat diet. At the same time, you have, so that's where, there is massive activity of the immune cells, actually. At the same time, cancers where you have almost lack of immune surveillance, actually. So you can connect the dots by choosing a type of diet that a person should be given, actually. And there is a recent report that even if somebody is diagnosed, God forbid, with cancer, for example, you can still manage these diseases by putting them on a proper diet, regimen, actually. So I think it has a huge potential in terms of how we can cash on the, on the possibilities where we can manipulate these microbiota to help us fight these deadly diseases, actually.
So over the last couple of decades, cancer incidence in many cases have been falling, but one notable exception to that is the fact that more and more young people are being diagnosed with colon cancer. And one result of that is that the American Cancer Society, of course, now advises that adults 45 years in age or over to undergo colon cancer screening. So that's a change from a few years ago when the value was 50. So why is this change come about? Why is this increased incidence of colon cancer in younger people?
Excellent question. So let me go back to the state of microbial profile in Western population. Actually, if you look at humans in general compared to any other primates in the Western world, we have the least diversity of the microbiota that you can imagine. So it's almost like an apocalypse, and that the microbiome could be the fifth horseman. Now, with that being said, I think it's several factors. Number one, a sedentary lifestyle, the type of diet we use, actually, and the excessive use of antibiotics, particularly in the developmental years, basically. So now there are two examples that I can tell you. Robert Wood Johnson Foundation recently came out with a very freaky kind of statistics where they found that 16% of children aged 10 to 17 are obese. That puts them at twice the risk for developing cancer at a very early stage. That's the report. The second report came out from Journal of American Medical Association, or JAMA, where they found that young women, actually, aged 20 to 49, are either overweight or obese. Actually, so now that also puts them at almost twice the risk for cancer, particularly colon cancer. Actually, now how are they associated? How are these changes reflecting in terms of microbial profile? We are still in very early stage to understand, if all of this is eventually related to the changes in microbiome, but those are some of the factors that we can very easily focus on, at least trying to prevent, these changes, actually, because obesity causes significant inflammation, and inflammation can lead to DNA damage, and therefore eventually causing these onsets to happen very early during that process. So I think there are a lot of avenues for us to sort of help stratify these patient population, and we can do. I have always been a big proponent of prevention rather than trying to cure a disease. Sure. And so my take on this is that we should go out and spread the message in the community in a way so that they can start looking at this seriously. Because again, the lifestyle these younger kids, these days with the smartphones and everything, they are changing or they are decreasing the latency period for most of these diseases, and therefore we have more and more incidence of these. Now, with that being said, actually, it's obviously what is not known, however, is that these are just the incidence reports, actually. Whether it's really happening, and is it advantageous to screen patients at 45 compared to 50 and higher, for example. We just have to wait and see, actually. But there are indications that can help us fight this deadly outcome.
So if you're just joining us, we're here with Dr. Shahid Umar, and we are discussing gut health and the microbiome. Alicia Miller is here in the studio to take your questions, and I believe we have a question from our internet audience. So Alicia, please go ahead.
We do. The first question is, do you recommend a plant-based diet?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. Because plants and fresh leafy vegetables, they are one of the best sources of antioxidants and fiber content, which will then increase the ratio of good bacteria versus bad bacteria, actually. So the idea is, again, to be able to fight or boost our own body's defense system in a way that they can fight on their own, basically. Okay.
Well, so please remember, if you want to share this discussion with friends or people you think might be interested or benefit from this, and use the hashtag #BenchToBedside. So Dr. Umar, you've been studying the role of bacterial infection in colitis and colon cancer for more than 20 years now. Could you tell us a little bit about your research in this area?
Absolutely. So I have always been fascinated by the tiny world of microbes, which cause about 20% of all the cancers, that's actually out there. The role of viruses in this thing is very well known because they cause well-known cancer etiologies such as hepatocellular carcinoma, head and neck cancer, cervical cancer, and so on and so forth, for example. When it comes to bacterial the role of bacteria in cancer, there are a lot of skepticism, and for the simple reason that these infections are transient, and therefore they can be treated with antibiotics, and therefore they don't cause any trouble. What we don't realize is that cancer is not a disease that happens overnight. Actually, some of these pathogens are strong enough to cause changes in our gut that will be reflected. These bacteria are eventually gone, but they may have caused the damage which will be then reflected 10, 15, 20 years down the road. My lab has been extensively involved in doing, working on a group of bacteria called driver bacteria that actually are sort of causative in this situation. So these bacteria cause infection. They can also cause inflammation and colitis. And with that kind of inflammatory background, it sort of increases the chances or sort of decreases the latency period for cancer. So my lab, along with the lab at MIT, has been extensively involved in this function. What the field is basically struggling with, however, is a simple concept that are the changes that we see are a result, are a cause of the disease or a consequence of the disease. And what we have been able to do is using specific mouse models. We have very easily, and very effectively showed, that we can increase, these tumor incidence in the colon, particularly by infecting with these driver bacteria. Now, what does it do then? So you infect a mouse with a driver bacteria. It then leads to changes in the microbiome in a way that some of them, even though they are commensals and helpful for you, they are opportunistic pathogens. So we call them pathobionts. When there is a initiation, basically, this then leads to changes in the gut microbiome in a way that then converts them into potential pathobionts. So they become the passenger bacteria. So a combination of driver passenger then causes a situation where you have a full-blown disease, basically. Now, one of my grants was also on focus on the simple premise that, God forbid, if somebody is diagnosed with colon cancer early, what if that person gets infected with some of these pathogens which are called the driver bacteria? Is it possible to expedite the whole process? Now, for that to happen, eventually what we are working on, and then I'm collaborating with a lot of other investigators, and the field in general is doing a prospective longitudinal study, because most of the studies that you see, that changes that you see, again, as I said before, during early stages of, cellular transformation, so if you will, may be lost 20 years down the road, So the idea is to do a longitudinal study where we can establish the cause and effect, and therefore basically definitively link the microbiome to colon cancer.
Okay. Alicia, looks like we have a couple of questions from our audience.
We do. The first one I'll give you is, how can you get your microbiome back on track?
So there are a lot of ways, that you can do. And I will be discussing this more as we go along. But there are several food that you can eat. There are the lifestyle changes that you can obviously, avoid, such as, sitting on a couch, for example. Get enough sleep. Don't be, stressed, because what actually happens is these bacteria can make us, thin or fat. They can make us sick or healthy, or they can make us, happy or sad. So it all depends on, how are we really prioritizing our, our day-to-day activities. And so if you really have a combination of good work ethics, there are ways you can improve. Even if you have an altered microbiota, there are several ways to get back on track, actually.
Okay. So our second question, Alicia?
Yes, the next question is, what is your recommendation for someone who has an instance of bacterial colitis?
Okay, so there are several ways you can do this. Obviously, again, number one is diet, but now more and more we are moving towards, because what happens that in these patient population, there is a severe change in bacterial composition that we call dysbiosis, actually. I mean. Now, how do we so basically our gut in those patients harbor bacteria which are more harmful than helpful, actually. I mean. And one of the ways very recently has taken this technique has taken off is called the fecal microbiota transplantation, or FMTs, actually. I mean. It has worked beautifully for C. diff patients, who are suffering from C. diff diarrhea, for example, particularly in those patients that are sort of resistant to antibiotics. After 3 different recurrent infections, actually, I mean, the only available strategy is fecal microbiota transplant, or FMT, actually. I mean. Now, it works very well. It's almost like a panacea in those patients, 95 to 98% with no side effects, no safety problem. However, for colitis patients, FMT may or may not work. It depends on the stage of the disease, the time of FMT, basically, and then the follow-up, actually. So there are now pills that people can use. We call it capsules. And so there are several ways, obviously the full potential of fecal microbiota transplant, or FMTs, will not be recognized until we have all the efficacy data, all the safety data, actually. Because you don't want to, children usually when they are young, they have colitis, actually. You don't want to give them a transplant which has, let's say, pathogens, for example. So you don't want to put them at risk later in life, basically. So there are ways to counter that, actually, but that's where the field is moving, actually.
Okay. So it looks like we have another question.
Yes, we do. What are your thoughts on using essential oils as natural supplements?
Right. So I think it all depends on individual basis, basically, because you and I can eat the same food and we can generate very different metabolites, because the type of bacteria we're carrying are very different, actually. So whether a person will respond to a particular intervention will really be dependent or dictated by the type of bacteria we are carrying, actually. So we obviously have to stay healthy in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day, what will really determine is a kind of approach which is known as the precision medicine, basically, where you give a prescription to a patient based on his or her, microbial profile. So I'm not sure whether, the medical profession is really moving to a stage where this will be a standard of care. But as a big proponent of microbial research, that's what I will really, sort of convey the message to, actually, because every patient is different. Right. And so the type of food that we take will depend on, the type of bacteria we are carrying in our gut, basically.
Okay. So just as kind of a follow-up to that, what is the evidence for the use of probiotics in normal individuals, and is there not evidence that has beneficial effects?
So that's, again, it's a great question, actually. So what are probiotics? Probiotics are a group of bacteria which are, when given in a sufficient amount, will cause health benefit. Okay. So now there are at least 2 different issues with probiotics. Number one size doesn't fit all. Okay. And number 2, it takes a village. Now, if you look at most of the probiotics which are out there, most of them are a group of 10 to 15 bacteria. In our gut, it's an ecosystem, basically, which is a consortium. So it's possible that you can choose a particular probiotic, actually. The problem is, although they are very helpful, they are healthy, we still don't have the safety data, number one. Number 2, these probiotics have to be taken continuously because they don't colonize the gut, actually, unfortunately. So there is a paper in Cell that just came out, actually, where they took patients on 2 antibiotics regimen. Actually, in one case, it was just given to these patients, who were either obese or or were on a high-fat diet, for example. And most of these bacteria were recovered in the stool, actually. So that means that these are the bacteria that are present in the lumen of the gut, actually, and they don't really necessarily associate with the epithelial cells of the gut, actually. In situations where the patients were given antibiotics and then were put on a probiotic regimen, there was very little recovery within the stool, actually, which suggests that the host flora sort of provides significant resistance to the intake of these probiotics or colonization of these probiotics, actually. At the same time, when you stop patients from, when these patients stop taking probiotics, actually, is there a possibility for the effect to persist? Actually, at the end of the day, that's what we need, basically. So now that will again depend on the level of dysbiosis or alteration in the microbiota, and whether our bodies are able to sort of respond efficiently to these probiotics. Actually, so I think there are obviously all the evidence so far hint towards a health benefit. Actually, but again, what we don't have is a prospective longitudinal study where we can really magnify the potential of these probiotics. So I usually am a big proponent of good bacteria. At the same time, what is also important is to keep in mind that nutrition, which is known as the prebiotics, so the dietary part, basically. Why don't we try to keep patients on or even a healthy person on a diet regimen which will promote the level of good bacteria, actually. So in other words, you are basically directly promoting the growth, and you're not even dependent on a supplement, actually, such as a probiotic.
Looks like we have an additional few questions here, Alicia.
Yes, we do. We have 4 questions now. If colon cancer runs in the family, can changes to your diet make a significant effect?
Absolutely, absolutely. And even it's not all lost. Even if you are diagnosed with, God forbid, with cancer, there are still several ways you can keep yourself from falling into a doomsday. It's not really cancer diagnosis is not necessarily the death sentence, basically. And there are several ways where you can improve your microbiome in a way that will sort of help you. Again, the immune system is a big player, actually. And if you can sort of invent or sort of teach the gut or your bodies, actually, or teach your bacteria to boost the immune system in a way. For example, one of the major regulatory cell in our bodies is called the regulatory T cells. These cells are significantly attenuated in patients who have cancer, actually. And so if you have a high fiber diet, for example, it generates these metabolites called short-chain fatty acids or butyrate, and butyrate can significantly upregulate these regulatory T cells, actually. It also helps in terms of mucus production. So you can seal all the barrier function in the gut. Therefore, the bacteria won't be allowed to become systemic. At the same time, you are boosting the immune system to sort of fight, these dysbiotic bacteria or opportunistic pathogens. Actually. So there are several ways we can help these these patients who have been diagnosed, with cancer. Actually.
Okay. So I would add to that, so obviously any patients that have a family history of cancer need to make sure that they're following the screening recommendations of their physicians, and that it's great to try to supplement or change things to influence the outcome, but that doesn't replace the need for continued screening.
Absolutely.
So what's our next question, Alicia?
The next question is how does drinking plenty of water or other liquids affect our gut health?
Yes, that's again an excellent point. Water. We are 90% water in our bodies actually. So it helps in terms of lubricating because what happens that let's say if you continuously eat high-fat diet. And there is very little fiber, particularly the insoluble fiber. So what insoluble fiber does, it causes, it's basically roughage, actually. So it absorbs water and keeps the stool moist, actually. Okay. So when let's say what happens that usually, we have a habit of going to the bathroom, on a regular basis, basically. Let's say you or skip a cycle. What happens that the water gets reabsorbed, and therefore that makes the stool, harder, basically. That can cause constipation, actually. So these dietary, agents can, when you have plenty of water, basically, it will help in lowering the transit time, and therefore your bowel movement will be easier, basically. That means that your bacteria, even if they have, some changes within them, they may not be stored for a long time within the rectum because that's where the stool is kept, before it is passed out, actually. So you don't have to allow these bacteria to stay longer in contact with your cells of the bodies, actually. And therefore, drinking plenty of water sort of helps recover, that process, actually.
Well, I'll drink to that.
Awesome.
Just kidding. What's our next question, Alicia?
The next question is, are there other supplements or interventions beyond weight and obesity that will positively alter our gut biota?
So again, there are several supplements, but one has to be very careful, and I would suggest that you talk to your, primary care physician or your, oncologist before you, start. I will never recommend anything over the counter, basically, without just, talking with your physician first of all, for example, because number one, we don't know how they were stored. We don't know what is the composition of, let's say, if they are probiotic supplements, for example, or they are, food supplements, for example. What is the efficacy? What is the amount, that you need for, a sufficient health benefit, basically. So before really embarking on these supplements, I would be very careful and talk to my physician, so that he or she can prescribe, based on, your situation, basically. And everybody is different, obviously, in terms of, what the type of bacteria we carry in our gut, actually. So I will be very careful.
Okay. So maybe you could just summarize what are some of the recommendations that you have at a practical level in terms of keeping a healthy gut?
Right. So, we in the Western world, have come to a stage we are literally starving our microbial self. So it's about time, so basically by its very nature, the microbiome or microbiota is extremely susceptible but it involves, the way it is shaped involves significant plasticity. Now, what does it mean? It means that there has to be, you have to have boundaries. And what happens when these boundaries are crossed? To what extent these microbiome or microbiota are susceptible to perturbations? And I will give you two examples. Pregnancy is one of the major, regulator of microbiome dynamics, actually. So three periods are important. One, before pregnancy, during pregnancy, and after the child is born, basically. And during that period, the use of antibiotics is very important, actually. So there has been so many, literature, findings, scientific findings now available, where what they find is that these children, when they are born, and if they are, number one, if they are, let's say, if they are C-section, babies, actually. So the type of birth will determine the type of bacteria we carry in our gut, actually. So C-section versus, the vaginal delivery, for example. Babies that are born with C-section, they miss the birth canal transit, actually. So that means that they will be colonized by bacteria, which is whatever is present in the environment at that time, actually. That means that they may not be inheriting the fair share of microbiome from a mother's bodies, actually, basically, right? So what are the consequences of these, actually? These children, and some of them are colic, for example. Some of them receive significant amount of antibiotics. There is a population of children that are sometimes they are preterm. They have necrotizing enterocolitis, for example. And all of these are based on a very altered microbiome, actually. And so what we need to do eventually is cut down on the use of antibiotics, either prenatal or postnatal, for example, because these children are, when they are given excessive antibiotics, there are reports that when they receive antibiotics at early stage, these children go on to develop allergies, asthma, obesity, and all those, later in life, actually. So if you can cut down, on the use of antibiotics, that's one thing. Number two, if we can limit the C-sections, only in those cases, obviously, where it is unavoidable, for example. Speaking of that C-section, there is a fascinating study that was just published. A family in Virginia went through a C-section, but what the physicians did then actually was they took the birth canal fluid, actually, and then wiped it on babies' bodies, actually. And the idea was to, promote, or jumpstart, the bodies. So that basically, people are calling it a bacterial baptism, actually. And so that's a fascinating development in this field. And hopefully, obviously, in cases where these C-sections are unavoidable, for example, then those strategies can be very, very helpful. Actually.
Okay. Looks like we have some additional questions.
We do. How effective are fermented foods?
That's a great question, actually. Because our bodies, particularly the food that we eat, and that goes mostly a soluble fiber that does not get digested in the upper GI. It goes to the colon, which is the large intestine, and that's where it gets fermented, actually. Now, whether, again, supplements which are available over the counter, whether they will be able to sort of replace the healthy lifestyle that we can have. So I would rather recommend use of yogurt, for example, which has live cultures. Use of fruits that are rich in whole grains. Cut down on red and processed meat, for example. Increase soluble fiber, and all of those strategies can sort of help solidify or sort of rectify some of these issues.
Okay. So as we approach the end of today's Bench to Bedside session, Dr. Umar, what key takeaways would you like to leave with our Facebook audience?
So I think what we will have to do is give up on our sedentary lifestyles. We have to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. And what we really need to do is basically we owe a good microbiome to our next or future generations, actually. Something that our ancestors have colonized for more than 200,000 years, actually. I think we have to start, before it is too late. So it's a good way to end this discussion. But if you keep your bacteria healthy, trust me, they will be dancing in your gut, actually.
That's good. First of all, I want to say thank you to our Facebook audience for a lot of great questions today. And have we covered everything, Alicia?
There are two more here.
Okay.
One is there evidence of diet helping other gastro cancers, for example, stomach or small intestinal cancers?
Yes, and so that's, again, it's an excellent question, because the entire GI tract, where 90% of the bacteria are there, they may be at some point of time altered in a way that will cause disease at the site. Particularly, there is now evidence of duodenal cancers caused by changes in microbiome, for example. Now, H. pylori, for example, that's what sort of solidified people's belief in bacteria causing cancer because it was discovered to cause gastric cancerectomy. So that there are several ways we can still maintain a level of healthy microbiome, and therefore some of these approaches really are very, very meaningful in terms of keeping us healthy overall.
Okay. I think we have one additional question.
One more question. Let's see here. Are products like Plexus, BioCleanse, and ProBio5 helpful? Are you familiar with these products?
Yes and no. I'm familiar with them. Whether they provide health benefits, that again depends on every person is different. There are several products that are available in the market. Bio25 is also one of them. There are some very good probiotics, but we still don't have a safety and efficacy data and a longitudinal study data which will suggest that in the long term they will really provide benefits. But all the evidence again favors our approach that there is at least no harm in taking these supplements, except that you have to be cognizant of your situation, number one, and then talk to your physician before you take any supplement.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Umar, for a fascinating session today. That's all for now. For more information on colon cancer, please visit kucancercenter.org. We appreciate you joining us, and we invite you to tune in next week, Wednesday at 10 a.m. for Bench to Bedside. Thanks for watching.